In the heart of the rugged west, where the sun bleeds crimson across the horizon, a lonely rancher, haunted by grief, finds solace only in the cold embrace of his rifle. But when danger threatens the spirited saloon lady, a fierce survivor in her own right, his aim transforms from vengeance to salvation. Their fates entwined in a desperate battle against a world that seems intent on tearing them apart, they discover that redemption can be found in the most unexpected of alliances. Will love blossom in the wake of loss? Or will their pasts cast shadows too dark to escape? Join us on this heart-pounding journey of courage and second chances. Like and subscribe for more tales that stir the soul. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain of Clayridge, a small town nestled in the heart of the Wyoming prairie, miles from the nearest railroad. Dust swirled in the late afternoon light, clinging to the wooden structures that had long withstood the harshness of wind and time. The saloon stood prominently on the main street, its paint peeling and faded, yet still offering the promise of fleeting reprieve to weary travelers and townsfolk alike. Inside, laughter echoed, mingling with the clinking of glasses, but outside, the world felt heavier, weighed down by loss and the burden of unspoken words. In the midst of it all stood Ethan Rourke, a widowed rancher whose life had become an endless cycle of solitude and regret. His once vibrant ranch sprawled under the vastness of the sky, but it now felt more like a prison than a home. The cattle grazed in the distance, oblivious to their master's anguish, a man who had traded the warmth of companionship for the chill of emptiness. His eyes, deep-set and weary, scanned the horizon as if searching for answers in the undulating waves of the prairie grass. A rifle rested against his shoulder, a familiar weight, yet it felt more like a reminder of the life he had lost than a tool for the protection he once valued. Ethan had always been a man of few words, preferring the solace of the open range to the cacophony of human emotion. The remnants of his wife's laughter lingered in the corners of his memory, a haunting melody that tugged at his heart when the silence grew too loud. With each passing day, he felt as if he were merely going through the motions, feeding the cattle, mending fences, and tending to the land that seemed to mock his loneliness. Time had dulled the edges of his grief, but the ache remained, a gaping wound that refused to close. That evening, as shadows stretched longer and the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan found himself drawn to the saloon. The pull was magnetic, a flicker of hope amidst the shadows. He stepped onto the creaking wooden porch, the sound of the door swinging open, announcing his arrival to the raucous crowd within. Men gathered around the bar, exchanging tales of triumph and heartbreak, but Ethan lingered at the threshold, watching and waiting. His heart raced, not from excitement but from the vulnerability that ricocheted off the warm laughter that filled the room. Then he saw her, a strong figure behind the bar, pouring drinks with a grace that belied the hard edges of her world. The saloon lady, with a fire in her eyes that could light even the darkest corners of his soul. She moved with a confidence that captivated him, her laughter ringing out like a bell, cutting through the haze of his grief. In that moment, it felt as if time halted. The noise faded into a dull thrum, and all that remained was the undeniable pull between them, an unspoken connection that buzzed in the air like dry lightning. But the reprieve was short-lived. A commotion broke out at the far end of the bar, a scuffle igniting like a flash fire as tempers flared and fists flew. Ethan's instincts kicked in, and in a blur of motion, he shifted his rifle, leveling it with steady hands, ready to protect. His heart raced, not just from the chaos, but from the realization that in this fractured world, he was still capable of heroism, that perhaps in saving this fierce woman, he might discover the path to his own redemption. The stakes had risen beyond mere survival. The very essence of life was calling him back, urging him to break through the silence that had wrapped around him like a shroud. The scuffle erupted violently, sending chairs scraping across the wooden floor and men tumbling like tumbleweeds caught in a storm. Ethan's gaze hardened, focused on the chaos swirling around him. A figure emerged amid the dust and din, a tall man with a rugged face, twisted in rage. He swung his fist, connecting with a patron who stumbled backward, hitting a table full of drinks. Glass shattered and whiskey splashed like rain. For a moment, the whole saloon seemed to hold its breath, teetering on the edge of impending disaster. Ethan felt the pulse of the room quicken, a mix of fear and anticipation. He couldn't just stand by. He had watched too long from the sidelines, a silent observer in a life that had moved on without him. With his rifle still braced against his shoulder, he stepped forward, cutting through the thick tension that hung like smoke. The saloon lady caught his eye, her fire dimmed momentarily by the unfolding chaos, but even in that instant, Ethan saw her resolve harden. She knew how to navigate these storms. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the flicker of determination in her gaze. As fists flew, the man who had instigated the fight threw another punch, but it never connected. Ethan was quicker, his rifle aimed and steady. The room fell silent, save for the ominous click of the hammer being pulled back. "Enough!" His voice rang out, low but firm, a command wrapped in authority, forged in solitude. The tension shifted, eyes darting toward him, uncertainty mirrored on the faces of both the brawlers and the onlookers. The saloon lady stood behind the bar, her breath caught, feeling the weight of his presence like a promise hanging in the air. The ruffian paused, eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation, the fight draining from him as he met Ethan's unyielding stare. The rifle was a barrier, yes, but it also represented something more, a challenge. Ethan didn't flinch. In that moment, he became the embodiment of courage, a stark contrast to the emptiness that had filled his days. He felt the eyes of the saloon lady upon him, the quiet gratitude that flickered through her, urging him to hold his ground. With a reluctant sigh, the aggressor took a step back, glancing around as if searching for support among his rowdy companions. But they too had fallen silent, eyes flicking between Ethan and the now restrained brawler. The defeat hung heavily in the air, palpable and tangible. The saloon lady's eyes shone with a mix of admiration and relief, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He had chosen to step into the light rather than remain cloaked in shadows. The fight diffused like smoke in the wind, leaving a stillness that settled over the room. Ethan lowered his rifle but kept it ready, the weight of it now a comforting presence. The saloon lady stepped forward, her confidence reasserted, the fire returned to her eyes. As she approached him, the noise faded, and time seemed to bend, a moment suspended. In that fleeting instant, the world outside and the pain of his past faded away, and all that mattered was this fierce woman, this shared heartbeat in a place steeped in chaos. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the stirrings of something long buried, a flicker of hope that perhaps, in saving her, he had begun the journey of saving himself. Ethan remained still, the aftermath of his intervention hanging in the air, tension dissipating like steam from a pot that's just stopped boiling. The saloon lady stepped closer, her expression shifting from apprehension to something deeper, a recognition of connection forged in unexpected conflict. He felt the warmth radiating between them, stronger than the lingering sting of adrenaline coursing through his veins. She reached him, pausing just enough for him to see the resolve in her eyes, an unspoken gratitude that cracked the shell of his solitude. Her fingertips brushed against the barrel of his rifle, and in that touch, Ethan felt the weight of his own burdens begin to lift, if only slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice low and steady, echoing in the moment like a promise. There was strength in her softness, a paradox that somehow stirred within him a forgotten yearning. They were two souls intertwined in this chaotic world, each having weathered their storms, now standing anchored against the tide. He nodded, the gesture small but significant, acknowledging the bond as a spark igniting the dry kindling of his heart. The once raucous crowd resumed their murmurs, a low hum that filled the space between them, but they floated on the periphery of Ethan's awareness. His gaze remained locked on her, drawn to the defiance that flared in her demeanor as she leaned against the bar, embodying both vulnerability and resolve. He felt unraveling tendrils of loneliness, tethered tightly around his chest, begin to fray. In that moment, he wanted to reach out, to bridge the chasm that had separated him from life. Without thinking, he placed the rifle on the bar beside her and stepped closer, letting the cool, wooden surface separate them for just a heartbeat longer. It dawned on him that his fear was no longer the force that had paralyzed him. It had morphed into something alive, pushing him toward bravery. "Let me buy you a drink," he dared to say, the words tasting foreign and bold. The invitation hung in the air as he braced himself against her gaze, willing to step into the vulnerability of connection. Her lips curved into a tentative smile, a fleeting ray that cut through his lingering shadows, and with a nod, she responded, "Only if you promise not to aim that thing at me." The tension of the earlier confrontation dissipated entirely, replaced by a warmth that swirled in the air like the smoke from the whiskey-drenched breath of the saloon. Ethan felt a chuckle rise in his chest, a sound unfamiliar yet welcome. In her words, he sensed not just humor, but an acceptance of who he was, of the battle he had just fought, not only with the ruffian, but with his own demons. As the saloon lady poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, the world around Ethan softened. The chatter of patrons faded into the background, a mere echo of life moving forward while he remained rooted in this moment. He realized that she was not an escape from his grief, but rather a catalyst for healing. The weight of his past no longer suffocated. Instead, it became a backdrop against which he could paint the new strokes of his future. He reached for the glass she offered, their fingers brushing together, an electric spark that sent a tremor through him. They raised their glasses, colors reflecting the warmth of the lamplight overhead, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt the possibility of something new unfurling within him. A shared connection, born out of chaos and compassion, ignited hope, a flicker promising that he could still forge bonds in a world that had tried to seal him into silence. It was a moment small yet profound, a stepping stone into the unknown, and as they drank, the saloon and its unruly patrons faded further into the periphery, leaving only the 2 of them, 2 souls navigating through life, drawing closer under the vast expanse of the Wyoming sky. The laughter in the saloon danced around Ethan like a forgotten melody, but the warmth of the moment felt fragile, as if a sudden gust could sweep it away. He leaned against the bar, glass in hand, acutely aware of the woman beside him, her presence igniting something long dormant within him. The weight of the rifle had been replaced by the subtle pressure of their shared silence. He stole glances at her, tracing the lines of her face, the way her lips curved with unpretentious confidence. His heart thrummed with an urgency he hadn't felt in years, entwined with the remnants of his grief, yet yearning for renewal. Each passing moment held a weight that pressed down on him, the echoes of the earlier chaos still reverberating in his chest. He wanted to ask her about the life she led behind the bar, the dreams tucked away like the dust under the floorboards. Yet the words tangled in his throat, caught in the undertow of his own timidity. He raised the glass to his lips, the whiskey's warmth swirling down his throat, creating an ember of courage. As he swallowed, he caught her watching him, her gaze holding a mixture of curiosity and understanding that made him acutely aware of his own vulnerabilities. The hum of the saloon crashed back with the arrival of a boisterous group, laughter spilling over the edges of their conversation like beer from a full mug. Ethan's heart stuttered, and he instinctively straightened, the remnants of his instinct to protect surfacing again. The saloon lady turned her head to assess the newcomers, her expression shifting to one of measured wariness. He admired her poise, how she could navigate the unpredictable undercurrents of the room with a practiced eye. She stood as a sentinel against chaos, a stark reminder that this was her domain, a fierce guardian of her own space. "Don't worry," she said, her voice low enough for only him to hear, a soft reassurance that penetrated the din of the crowd. He felt himself relax, the tension simmering just below the surface, easing ever so slightly. They're just loud, not dangerous. But he could see the flicker of apprehension in her eyes, a momentary shadow that seemed to deepen her resolve. In that instant, he realized that she too had her battles, layered beneath the laughter and bravado. It stirred something in him, a dawning recognition that they were more alike than he had first believed. Before he could respond, one of the men from the group swayed unsteadily toward them, laughter spilling from his lips like a drunken song, hand reaching out for the bar, careless energy radiating from him like the dull thud of a distant storm. Ethan felt the familiar coils of tension tighten in his chest, that protective instinct flaring anew. The world around him narrowed to the threatening figure, and he instinctively shifted his weight, positioning himself just slightly in front of the saloon lady, a barrier against the potential of violence. "Watch yourself," Ethan said, his voice low but steady, a warning that masked the urgency thrumming beneath his skin. The man paused, surprise flashing momentarily in his eyes. The room felt suspended. A shared breath caught between them, his presence forging an unspoken pact. He would shield her from the uncertainty of this life as long as he drew breath. In that quiet standoff, Ethan felt the pulse of something larger than himself, an intertwining of lives that reached beyond mere survival. It was a hint of something deeper, a possibility of redemption casting its light into the shadows of his existence. As the confrontation hovered in the air like a charged storm, he sensed both the peril of the moment and the promise it held. The air thickened with tension as the drunken man assessed Ethan, the messy excitement swirling in the saloon momentarily dulled by the unyielding stare of the rancher. The room held its breath, a silent witness to the fragility of the moment. Ethan could feel the weight of his intentions settle heavily in the pit of his stomach. A responsibility to protect the woman beside him, a call to step out of the shadows. He didn't merely defend her. He was guarding a flicker of hope, a promise that life could still hold meaning. The man stumbled closer, drunken bravado flickering in and out like a dying flame. "What's the problem, cowboy?" he slurred, raising a hand as if it were meant for camaraderie rather than aggression. Ethan caught a glimpse of uncertainty behind the bravado, a hint of fear masked by alcohol's courageous embrace. Yet it ignited something fierce within him. He couldn't afford to show weakness. He would face this storm, not only for himself but for her, a fierce, unyielding force who stood beside him against chaos. "Just mind your business," Ethan replied, his voice a gravelly whisper laced with authority. The saloon lady shifted slightly behind him, her presence fortifying him. In that moment, she wasn't just an observer, she was his anchor, grounding him to a sense of purpose he had long abandoned. She understood the stakes. The unvoiced connection between them deepened, wrapping them together like the strands of a lasso, tighter with each beat of his heart. He turned, just briefly catching her eye. There it was, a flicker of gratitude and understanding that ignited the embers of something he thought had long since died. The drunken man hesitated, the hostility ebbing, a flicker of hesitation born of Ethan's steadfastness. Defiance met vulnerability in that confined space, a silent dialogue that spoke louder than any words. Ethan's chest swelled with unspent emotions, years of grief and solitude, fear mingling with an awakening desire to reclaim life and protect what was now his. He could feel the pulse of the room, hearts collectively holding their breath, and in that moment he made a choice that transcended the fray, the choice to engage, to connect, to allow the fire within him to flicker back to life. The brawling man glanced toward the saloon lady, uncertainty clouding his features as he recognized Ethan's firm stance against him, an insurmountable wall of protectiveness. He faltered, the bravado slipping through his fingers like grains of sand, before he finally huffed and stepped back, retreating into the crowd. The air gradually thickened with release, the collective tension ebbing like the tide pulling back from the shore. But in that vacancy, Ethan remained acutely aware of the saloon lady's presence at his side, the warmth radiating from her like the flicker of a campfire in the darkness. In the aftermath, he turned again, fully facing her, and felt the world around them blur into insignificance. She stepped forward, her eyes brightening, reflecting an understanding deeper than mere words could convey. Ethan marveled at the quiet strength in her demeanor, a reminder that solitude was not the only option. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured, the softness of her voice breaking the remnants of the noise around them. A tenderness emerged, rare and precious like a strand of gold, amidst the gritty reality they navigated together. "I chose to," he replied, voice barely above a whisper, honesty spilling forth as he caught her gaze. In that gaze, he saw each scar and challenge, the resilience that shone through her laughter and grace. Emotions mingled in the air, unspoken yet palpable. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of the world crashing down upon his shoulders. In her eyes, he glimpsed a flicker of what could be, a shared future stitched together from the remnants of their past pains, a promise that perhaps it was possible to forge a life again, not just alone but together, riding the unpredictable winds of life side by side. As the silence settled over the saloon like a heavy quilt, the distance between Ethan and the saloon lady closed, her presence radiating warmth that flickered against the chill of his lingering solitude. He could see the momentary hesitation etched on her face, the unsteady equilibrium between gratitude and something deeper that hung between them like a promise waiting to be spoken. She didn't retreat into a shell. Instead, she stepped forward with a newfound purpose, her gaze unwavering, as if daring him to take that next leap into the unknown. The light from the hanging lamps danced in her eyes, and in that glow, Ethan felt a burgeoning possibility pulse in his chest. Without breaking eye contact, the saloon lady reached out, her fingers brushing against his forearm, a delicate but deliberate gesture that sent a jolt of awareness coursing through him. The connection sparked alive, igniting something inside him that had lain dormant and still for far too long, like kindling waiting for the first breath of flame. His gaze flickered down to where her hand rested, a roughened surface meeting the soft warmth of her touch, and he felt the weight of his own uncertainty give way to a surge of courage in that fleeting moment. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice breaking the silence with a resonance that felt like music, a reminder that every note had a place in the symphony of life. It was a gentle intonation, threading through the remnants of chaos like a balm that soothed the raw wounds of his soul. "You came to my defense tonight, and that matters more than you know." Her sincerity wrapped around him, an invitation whispered in the hush of the saloon, and he felt something shift between them. A bridge spanning the divide of their lonely existences, its foundation built on shared moments of bravery and vulnerability. Ethan exhaled slowly, the heat of her gaze a steady flame against the swirling shadows of his past. "I was just doing what needed to be done." His voice was grounded, firm yet edged with the tremor of emotions he had long kept at bay. The silence lingered, thick with anticipation, before she seized that breath of hesitation and transformed it into something tangible. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped closer, the air weaving around them like a silken thread connecting their spirits amid the unfurling chaos of the saloon. In a bold gesture, the saloon lady lifted her other hand, placing it gently against his cheek, her fingertips cool against his weathered skin. It was an act of bravery in itself, an offering of trust that left Ethan momentarily breathless. He felt the weight of her compassion settle over him like a mantle, enveloping him in warmth and reassurance. The world around them faded further, the noise melding into a distant hum as she leaned in, her voice barely a whisper that vibrated through him. "You fought for me tonight, Ethan. Let me fight for you now." The words hung in the air, solid and unyielding, binding them in a shared promise. In that heartbeat, Ethan understood. Her bravery was not just in the scuffle that night, but in the recognition of two lives intertwined against the backdrop of loss and resilience. The flicker of hope ignited into a steady flame, blazing bright against the darkness that had clung to him for far too long. He nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of the truth that blossomed between them, a truth rooted in shared scars and the courage to forge ahead. As they stood together, hands lingering, it was clear their paths had collided at just the right moment, a transformative gesture that could lead them both toward redemption, one shared moment at a time. The heavy silence that enveloped Ethan and the saloon lady felt thick, almost tangible, as if the whole world had drawn in its breath. Yet in that stillness, an unspoken tension wove its way into the air, pulling at the edges of Ethan's heart. The warmth of her hand against his cheek grounded him, the brush of her fingers igniting something long buried within him, a flicker of hope and the painful pang of remembrance. He could almost hear the echoes of laughter, the sweet sound of his late wife's voice, dancing through the memories of their shared life on the ranch. He turned his gaze down, lost in the grip of nostalgia, where shadows of the past began to unfurl before him like the slow unraveling of a faded tapestry. The laughter of their children echoed in the recesses of his mind, a haunting melody blended with the quiet, heavy sorrow of loss. He recalled the way Annie had always known when to interject lightness into their lives, using humor to dissipate the darkness that sometimes crept in uninvited. She had been his anchor, her laughter a balm against the harsh reality that they had endured in their years together. The memories crashed over him, a tidal wave of warmth and regret, reminding him just how much joy had been swept away with her passing. Ethan shook himself from the reverie, the weight of his grief pressing down on him like a thick fog. He took a slow, measured breath, searching for a way to articulate the storm that stirred within. He could feel the saloon lady's gaze on him, a potent mix of concern and tenderness radiating from her eyes. She may not have known the depths of his sorrow, the silent battles he fought each day, but she offered him a lifeline, a chance to step away from the gaping maw of his past. A strand of guilt threaded itself through his heart at the thought of leaning on her, of seeking solace in her strength, but he could no longer afford to let the ghosts of his past dictate his present. His voice emerged, low and gravelly, almost lost amid the raucous laughter that had returned to the saloon, an ironclad will wrapped in a vulnerability he had refused to show for far too long. "I lost my wife," he confessed, words tumbling forth as if freshly uncovered from within the stone wall he had erected around his heart. There was no bravado in his tone, only the raw honesty of a man who had carried the weight of the world alone for too long. The saloon lady's hand lingered on his cheek, her thumb brushing against the stubble, as if silently assuring him that he was seen, that he was not as alone as he believed. A flicker of pain crossed her features, and it struck him. There was a world of understanding that lay in those depths, a shared experience of loss lurking behind her gaze. Their connection, born from the chaos of the night, now unfurled in the gentle caress of understanding and compassion. With each second that passed, Ethan felt the walls around his heart begin to crack, revealing the remnants of warmth and hope that had lain dormant for too long. He fought the urge to pull away, to shield himself from the risks that came with vulnerability, but he remained anchored by the undeniable truth standing before him. She was strong, resilient, and willing to share the burdens they both carried. As laughter erupted around them, Ethan felt the sound blend with the memories that lived on the edges of his mind. Annie's laughter had been a salve, a reminder of life's sweetness amidst the bitter taste of loss. But standing here, hand in hand with the saloon lady, he began to see that joy could still find him, that it was possible to carve out new paths of connection, even while carrying the weight of remembrance. The realization struck him anew. If he did not allow himself to embrace the warmth of this budding kinship, he would forever remain shackled to his grief, forever alone. With a resolve that felt like a long, dormant muscle awakening, Ethan leaned in, allowing the warmth of her presence to envelop him. "I think I'm ready to try again," he whispered, the words coming out as a testament to the promise he made to himself, the promise to embrace life, however imperfect it may come. The flicker of hope ignited into a steady flame, and in that moment, he understood that the strength within him had always existed. It had simply awaited the right spark to emerge. Together, standing amid the chaotic life of the saloon, they could build something new, a connection born from loss, yet tempered with renewed possibilities, a union of hearts navigating the unknowns together. As the night wore on, the saloon buzzed with energy, laughter rising and falling like the tide. Yet, amid the merriment, an undercurrent of tension seemed to thread its way through the atmosphere. Ethan and the saloon lady stood close, their fingers still entwined, yet beneath the warmth of connection lay the remnants of unspoken fears, fears that began to cloud the fragile hope blooming between them. The fire of their shared moment flickered uneasily, the reality of their pasts hovering like a spectre just outside the comforting glow. Ethan shifted his weight, his gaze drifting past her to the raucous crowd beyond. He watched as a group of patrons crowded around the piano, laughter rising and falling in a cacophonous symphony. A fleeting thought tugged at his heart. Could he truly allow himself to move forward? The weight of his grief pressed against his chest, an unwelcome reminder that the world could turn dark again at any moment. The saloon lady sensed his shift, and her grip on his hand tightened, a silent inquiry that pulled at him even deeper. But the weight of doubt twisted in his gut, and indecision flared like a storm cloud on the horizon. "What if you're just being kind out of pity?" he blurted, the words tumbling from him like jagged stones. The moment they left his lips, he regretted them. But there they hung, sharp and bitter. As if struck, the saloon lady's expression shifted. The warmth that had illuminated her features suddenly dimmed, replaced by a flicker of hurt. Ethan flinched, realizing he had undone the very bond they had just begun to forge with that one sweeping assumption, a thought steeped in his own insecurities and fears. "Kindness isn't pity, Ethan," she replied quietly, her voice steady but edged with a pain that twisted in him. "I see you, I see what you've endured, and I want to help you find your way back to the light." Her words cut through the noise of the saloon, imbued with sincerity. But even as she spoke, there loomed a chasm of misunderstanding between them, an invisible barrier forged by silence and past wounds. She took a step back, the distance between them growing stark and tangible, a fracture that felt all too familiar to Ethan. He felt an ache spread through him, the shadows of his past clawing at him, awakening the very fears he thought he had begun to shake off. Memories of Annie's laughter twisted into a melody laced with sorrow, reminding him of the pain that came with loving and losing. The thought of exposing himself again, of risking the kind of heartbreak he wasn't sure he could endure, nagged at him like a relentless ache. As he studied her, the resolve in her eyes only deepened his uncertainty, the very strength he was drawn to, now seeming like a challenge he didn't know how to face. Silence stretched between them, a taut line frayed at the edges, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last as the bustling saloon faded into a distant murmur. Ethan's chest tightened, the rush of emotions swirling inside him, a tempest of fear, regret, and longing that threatened to break free. The laughter around him grew distant, the world blurring as he realized he was on the precipice of losing something he had just begun to cherish. "I'm not ready for this," he confessed, the words barely making it past the tightness in his throat, leaving both of them standing at the edge of a precipice, teetering between loss and the compelling pulse of something new. The weight of their shared moment felt heavier now, the warmth of connection giving way to a chilling reality. Could he truly open his heart again when it had been so thoroughly bruised? The tension crackled like a summer storm in the air, thick and heavy with unspoken words. Ethan felt the weight of the saloon lady's gaze, a steady presence that urged him to confront his fears. But just as he began to find footing in the tumultuous sea of emotions, a commotion erupted outside, shattering the fragile connection they had just begun to forge. The saloon door swung open violently, framing a silhouette against the backdrop of the fading twilight, a figure cloaked in shadows, a harbinger of chaos descending upon Clayridge. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd, laughter halting in midair, replaced by gasps as the figure burst into the saloon, eyes wild and frantic. The man's boots stomped against the wooden floor, dust swirling around him. Ethan's instincts kicked in. Something was very wrong. He turned his body slightly, his presence instinctively shielding the saloon lady as the chaos unfurled. A primal urge to protect flaring inside him as fiercely as the fire ignited in the hearth. The air grew still, thickening with fear as the tension escalated, a low hum of anxiety buzzing in the hearts of those who dared to watch. The stranger, breath coming in ragged bursts, blurted out words of warning that tangled into a frantic narrative. Riders coming, outlaws, heading this way. Panic laced his voice, each syllable a hammer striking against the fragile calm. The saloon lady caught Ethan's eye, her expression shifting from concern to steel, the fire in her gaze igniting anew. For a fleeting moment, he saw in her the strength that had first drawn him in. She would not falter. But the reality of the situation bore down on him like the weight of his past, a stark reminder of what it meant to face danger. The crowd began to stir, nerves fraying as panic fluttered like a flap of a bird's wings. "Get to the back!" the saloon lady shouted, her voice rising above the din, commanding as she moved into action, pushing patrons toward the rear exit. The urgency in her tone sparked a primal reaction within Ethan, and he stepped into the thick of it, his body taut and ready. He felt his heart race, thrumming against his ribs like the steady pulse of a war drum. As he shifted his weight, he could almost hear Annie's laughter in the echoes of the past, but the thought was overshadowed by the urgency of the present. He had lost too much already. And now, faced with an external threat, he felt the ember of purpose igniting fiercely within his chest. Clutching his rifle tightly, Ethan scanned the doorway, every instinct honed and fine-tuned. He could feel the saloon lady's presence behind him, a force of nature he had only just begun to understand. "Stay close," he urged, a command shaped by newfound determination. The saloon lady nodded, her expression resolute as she fell back into step beside him. Together, they moved toward the entrance, drawing strength from one another as they prepared to face the onslaught. He caught her eye, a silent promise passing between them, a vow to stand united against whatever storm was about to come crashing through the saloon doors. As the first shadows of riders appeared on the horizon, swirling dust heralding their approach, Ethan felt the tightening knot of fear grip at his throat. There was no turning back now. The cries of the patrons faded into a dull roar in his ears, but his focus sharpened, narrowing on the threat looming just outside. He breathed deeply, steadied by the unwavering resolve of the woman at his side, a fierce reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. With a steely determination, he raised his rifle, ready to protect what fragile hope had begun to bloom, even as shadows threatened to swallow it whole. This time, he would fight not just for survival, but for the possibility of new life, a chance to forge ahead together, no matter the cost. Ethan stood at the threshold of the saloon, the air thick with tension, his heart beating in time with the distant thunder of hooves. The dust clouds billowed toward them like a storm gathering strength, a harbinger of chaos. He could feel the saloon lady's presence beside him, her energy radiating a fierce determination that grounded him amid the turmoil. Together, they adorned the threshold of uncertainty, a solid wall against the encroaching darkness. The grip on his rifle tightened, a familiar weight fusing with the urgency thrumming through his veins. Silence, enveloped the saloon, a moment suspended in time, where every breath felt heavy with anticipation. Ethan's gaze flicked to the saloon lady, who stood shoulder to shoulder with him, defiance etched into her features. In their shared silence, loyalty unfurled between them, a bond forged in the fires of conflict, tempered by mutual resolve. While the world outside threatened to collapse into chaos, that stillness forged a connection deeper than words could express, linking their fates in a moment that could change everything. The first rider broke from the dust, a fierce silhouette cutting through the haze, and in that instant, instinct ignited within Ethan. The saloon lady shifted beside him, unflinching, her hands steady at her side. They didn't need to exchange words. The unspoken understanding hung in the air like a promise. With a breath drawn deep from the core of his being, he raised his rifle, its cold barrel aligning with resolve. In that breath, he forged a silent oath, a vow to protect the flicker of hope that had dared to ignite between them. As the riders drew nearer, the saloon lady shifted closer, her presence a palpable force that fortified him. Each hoofbeat drummed like a heartbeat pounding in the chest of the earth, yet their proximity only deepened his focus. He felt her side brush against him, the unyielding strength that radiated from her, anchoring him to the present. The tension in the air thickened, yet amid the chaos, Ethan found comfort in the unwavering loyalty they shared. A partnership, pure and resolute, began to unfurl before him, one that dared to defy the looming storm. With a sudden burst, the riders burst into view, their faces twisted in a mixture of malice and reckless abandon. Ethan's heart raced, but he stood firm, arms steady, eyes narrowed in unwavering determination. He directed his gaze toward the saloon lady, who met his stare, and for a heartbeat, the world fell away. The raucous laughter, the taunting shouts of the approaching riders. It was just the two of them, bound by a unity that promised they would face whatever storms lay ahead together. A moment of unfiltered trust settled between them, marginal yet profound. Together, they could confront the tempest, unyielding in their shared strength. The first rider raised his arm, brandishing a weapon, and Ethan's pulse quickened. The air crackled with the energy of impending violence, a tornado ready to unleash its fury. But beside him, the saloon lady's stance remained unwavering, fierce and defiant. He felt the weight of her presence, as if she were a part of him, a vital reminder that in defending her, he was also safeguarding the dreams they dared to cultivate. Taking aim, he exhaled slowly, the world narrowing to a singular focus, a blazing light against the encroaching darkness. Then, as the first shot rang out, echoing like a thunderclap in the storm of their lives, Ethan felt the bond of loyalty surge within him. The rifle discharged, the sound reverberating through the saloon, and he could feel the saloon lady's unwavering resolve beside him, a steadfast companion in the face of chaos. Together, they blended into an unstoppable force, standing firm against the tide. The world outside might have threatened to crumble, but here, in this moment, they were united, strong, resilient, and ready to fight for each other, for the fragile light of hope they had ignited together. The wind howled outside like a restless spirit, swirling dust and echoes of the past into the dimly lit saloon. As the commotion of riders began to dissipate, Ethan felt the adrenaline in his veins slowly recede, replaced by a lingering tension that hung in the air, thick and palpable. He lowered his rifle, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier in his grip. The saloon lady stood beside him, breathless yet resolute, her eyes locked onto his with a fierce determination that both steadied and unsettled him. Each heartbeat resonated in the silence that enveloped them, an unbroken moment where spoken words felt unnecessary and a deeper truth began to unfurl between them. Gradually, the raucous laughter and chaos of the saloon resumed, patrons returning to their drinks, but the atmosphere had shifted. Ethan could feel the weight of their collective gaze, eyes that had witnessed his rescue of the saloon lady, but also the vulnerability that now lay bare between them. A shared understanding glimmered in the air, a recognition of battles fought and scars borne. In that breathless silence, the connection forged in the chaos became a bridge, tethering their lives together in a way that felt both delicate and unbreakable. The saloon lady stepped closer, her presence grounding him as she cast a wary glance toward the door, ensuring no further threats lingered. The tension of the confrontation still lurked in the corners of the room, yet he found solace in her proximity. He could feel the warmth radiating from her, a stark contrast to the chill of solitude that had enveloped him for years. It was an unfamiliar sensation, one that made him acutely aware of how much he had missed, how the echoes of laughter and joy had faded to mere whispers in the vastness of his life after Annie. He stole a glance at her, searching for something he couldn't quite name. A flicker of understanding, perhaps, or the shared burden of their collective loneliness. But as their gazes locked, he saw in her eyes a fierce grace that transcended her role behind the bar. It was a depth that spoke of strength, resilience, and the kind of vulnerability that invited him to be brave in return. With each passing second, he felt the seams of his heart stitching back together, the jagged edges softening under the weight of her gaze. She took a step closer, and the saloon lady's breath mingled with the remnants of their shared turmoil. "You saved me tonight," she murmured. Her voice barely above a whisper, but the gravity of her words hung in the air, tinged with something profound. Ethan felt the heat rise in his cheeks, the rush of emotions swirling inside him. It was not just the act of heroism that shaped the moment, but the fact that she was standing before him, an undeniable reminder of the life he had once known and the possibility of reclaiming it. The silence between them spoke volumes, hinting at shared battles and dreams, yet unfulfilled. In that moment, Ethan understood the truth that lay in her eyes. It was not pity or kindness that sparked her interest, but a shared recognition of kinship forged in the fires of heartbreak. He was not merely the widower who had stood at the edges of life, shrouded in sorrow. He was a man still capable of heroism and connection. And she was not just the saloon lady. She was a fierce soul, unafraid of the storms that life had thrown her way. They were two sides of the same coin, shaped by their pasts, yet ready to forge a new path forward, together. As the laughter around them swelled again, Ethan felt a shift within himself, a flicker of hope igniting from the ashes of his grief. Standing side by side with her, he could see a future, a shared embrace of life, of laughter, and of healing. In the dim light of the saloon, with the echoes of chaos fading into the distance, he dared to believe that together they could carve out a new existence. He reached for her hand, the warmth of her skin against his, grounding him further. With each passing second, he felt the chains of loneliness crack and shatter, opening the door to a world filled with possibilities and the chance to love again. Together, they would navigate the unpredictable trails of life, no longer mere shadows of their former selves, but brighter, bolder, and ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The mood in the Claridge saloon had shifted. A hard-won reprieve settled over the wooden floorboards, where laughter and clinking glasses harmonized with quiet relief. Yet beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension lingered, a reminder that their moment of connection could slip away like sand through fingers. Ethan stood beside the saloon lady, feeling the warmth of her hand in his, yet the world outside still loomed ominously. Panic had rattled the townsfolk, and uncertainty hung heavy, a storm cloud ready to burst. As the night deepened, a distant rumble echoed across the prairie, thunder, ominous and foreboding, a reminder of the approaching chaos. Ethan's heart stuttered, instinctively tightening his grip on her hand. The saloon lady, attuned to the shift in atmosphere, met his gaze with that same fierce determination he had come to admire. She stepped closer, and without a word, he felt the weight of their shared breath. Yet uncertainty flickered through him like a candle teetering in a draught. What would happen should calamity strike again? And then it came. A sudden explosion of chaos erupted outside the saloon, the sound of gunfire ringing out like a death knell in the darkness. Time seemed to slow, as if the prairie itself held its breath. The saloon lady's grip tightened reflexively around his hand, their connection a lifeline amidst the tumult. Ethan's instinct kicked in once again. He gently pulled her behind the bar, where the wooden structure offered a semblance of protection from the swirling chaos outside. "Stay low," he murmured, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. The saloon lady nodded, but there was no retreat in her eyes, only resolve. She peered over the edge of the bar, her expression fierce and undeterred. Ethan caught the fire within her, igniting the same resolve in him. They were not simply defending themselves, they were fighting for the fragile bond they had begun to weave in the aftermath of shared danger. "We need to keep everyone safe," she said, her voice low yet urgent, the weight of their growing partnership palpable in the air between them. With a determined nod, Ethan moved to the saloon door, his rifle at the ready. The sounds of panic were replaced with the relentless cadence of gunfire. The world outside had devolved into chaos. He could feel the saloon lady, this fierce woman who had stepped into his life like a vibrant brushstroke against a bleak canvas, watching him, and he knew they would face this as one. "Whatever happens, we stand together," he declared, his voice steady, a fierce promise encasing the uncertainty that had clung to them like shadows. The saloon door creaked open, revealing the maelstrom outside, and in that instant, Ethan stepped into the cascade of chaos, the rifle steady in his grip, the saloon lady beside him. Together they faced the storm, a unified front bearing the weight of their shared truth. As bullets flew and the world exploded into chaos, their bond solidified, a testament to the strength ignited within adversity. They fought not just for survival, but for a chance at life, at love, at crafting a future together. Each heartbeat resonating with the promise that together they could navigate the storm and emerge, not just intact, but forever changed. Ethan stepped into the tumult, rifle steady, heart pounding in unison with the chaos enveloping the saloon. The air crackled with tension as shouts and gunfire rang out, a cacophony that twisted into a wild crescendo. Yet amid the chaos stood the saloon lady, her presence a beacon of strength beside him. As they moved together, their footsteps resonated with a shared purpose, knitting their fates even tighter. Ethan's mind raced, adrenaline sharpening his focus, but instinctively he kept one eye on her, her bravery matching his own, a fierce partnership that was slowly unfurling in the wake of violence. He aimed the rifle outward, scanning for threats, but it was the saloon lady's steadfast gaze that anchored him, their breaths synchronized, quickened by the danger unfolding before them. The world outside was no longer just a prairie engulfed in darkness. It was a battlefield where he could reclaim both his courage and his will to fight. As he fired back at the oncoming assault, he felt the weight of her belief in him energizing his actions, transforming raw instinct into calculated resolve. Each shot he took resonated, not just as an act of defense, but as a testament to his willingness to protect what had begun to bloom between them. The clang of metal and splintering wood echoed in the chaos, punctuated by cries of uncertainty and fear from the patrons still huddled in the saloon. Their presence lingered in the background, but Ethan's focus remained steadfast on the horizon, where danger surged like a tidal wave. Yet woven into that tension was the saloon lady, who neither flinched nor cowered. Cashing checks on her own fierce spirit, she moved alongside him, unearthing her own strength as she called out directions, organizing the frightened patrons with a voice that rang clear, defiant, and unwavering. With every command she issued, he saw the depth of her resolve, a woman who had long since chosen to stand unyielding in the face of adversity. As the attackers pressed in, the saloon lady slipped closer, her fingers brushing against his arm, a lifeline amid the violence. It was a gesture so simple yet electric, sending a surge of warmth through him amid the cold reality of their circumstances. In that fleeting touch, he felt the ghosts of his past recede, the shadows of loss and regret dissipating under the steady glow of newfound purpose. They were fighting for each other, for a chance at something that had been snuffed out in the dark corners of their lives, and he realized that this battle was not just a clash for survival, but a reclamation of everything he had thought lost. With a final barrage of gunfire, the dust settled, and a tense silence enveloped the saloon. The riders, caught off guard by their unexpected unity and resolve, retreated, fading into the depths of the prairie night. Ethan lowered his rifle, heart still racing, but filled with an exhilarating mix of relief and triumph. The energy in the saloon shifted, transforming from fear to cautious hope, and he turned to the saloon lady whose breath matched his, a shared rhythm echoing the heart of the moment. Her eyes met his, brimming with defiance and warmth that sliced through the remnants of chaos. In that gaze, he saw not just gratitude for her salvation, but a spark of admiration blooming like wildflowers across the open prairie, vibrant and alive. The chaos had stripped away their reservations, leaving only the raw honesty of a connection forged in fire. In the aftermath of the storm, Ethan felt a quiet dignity restore itself within him. As they stood together, battered yet unbroken, he realized that he had not just fought to defend her life, but had reclaimed his own spirit along the way. In the flickering lamplight of the saloon, amid the laughter of those who had witnessed their strength, they had found more than survival. They had forged a bond destined to endure against the winds of uncertainty that life would always bear. The saloon was alive with an energy that pulsed like a heartbeat, laughter and relief mingling in the air, echoing off the wooden walls. Ethan stood beside the saloon lady, their hands still clasped together, an unbreakable link forged in the fires of chaos. The patrons who had cowered in fear moments ago now gathered in small clusters, recounting the harrowing moments of the attack, voices rising in triumph as they celebrated their survival. But for Ethan, the noise faded into a distant murmur. His focus remained fixed on the fierce woman beside him who had become the embodiment of hope in his life. She turned to him, eyes bright with determination, a spark of life that pulled at him like a moth to a flame. "We did it," she said softly, her voice barely rising above the clamor. Yet in those words lay a gravity that made the weight of the world feel lighter. Ethan nodded, squeezing her hand, an instinctive gesture of reassurance that resonated deeper than mere words. Together, they had weathered the storm, and in doing so, he found himself standing on the precipice of something new and beautiful. A future that had once been cloaked in shadows, now basking in the gentle glow of possibility. As the saloon patrons began to disperse, the atmosphere transformed from one of fear to a collective camaraderie forged in survival. The laughter echoed like music, a symphony of resilience that rang out as they embraced the dawn of a new day. Ethan's heart swelled with an unfamiliar warmth, a feeling he had thought lost along with his wife. But here, in this moment of shared victory, he felt it flicker to life again. A connection that had been buried, now resurrected in the unlikeliest of places. The saloon lady stepped slightly away, her gaze traveling over the faces of those they had fought to protect. She stood taller now, the shadows of fear no longer clinging to her. Ethan watched her, admiration blooming within him, as he noted the fire in her spirit, the unyielding strength that shone brightly in a world often fraught with darkness. It stirred something inside him, a desire not just to protect, but to nurture this newfound light, to help it grow amid the harshness of life. He remembered the emptiness that had enveloped him since Annie's passing, but felt that void begin to fill with something profound. Hope. "Let's clean up," she said, breaking him from his reverie, her voice imbued with purpose. Her determination was palpable, and Ethan felt his own resolve solidify alongside hers. They began to gather scattered glasses and debris, the mundane task a grounding balm against the remnants of the chaos that had just unfolded. As they worked side by side, brushes of their arms ignited sparks of warmth that danced between them, a silent promise that they were no longer alone. Each laugh shared over a fallen chair, every fleeting glance, became a thread stitching their lives together. The saloon's atmosphere began to shift, transforming into a sanctuary of belonging, each corner imbued with memories of their shared struggle. Ethan glanced at the saloon lady, who was now adjusting a lamp, a look of fierce concentration etched on her features. In that moment, he realized he wanted to be more than just a protector. He wanted to be a partner, to walk this unpredictable path of life alongside her. He took a breath, the air thick with the scent of whiskey and the spirit of resilience. "How about we get some fresh air?" he suggested, the idea forming like a dawn breaking through the horizon. With a nod, she agreed, and together they stepped outside into the cool embrace of the evening, the chaotic cacophony of the saloon fading behind them. The sky stretched overhead, painted with hues of indigo and gold, a canvas of hope reflecting the journey ahead. Ethan felt the weight of the past begin to lift, the shadows receding in the face of new beginnings. As he stood beside the saloon lady, he could sense the dawning promise of a life renewed, a life filled with laughter, connection, and the unwavering courage to embrace whatever lay ahead. Together, they would navigate the trails of uncertainty, their hearts intertwined, like the wildflowers blooming across the vast Wyoming prairie, steadfast against the winds of change.